First of all, Tejas, thanks for having me here and congratulations to you and the team. Great job. I've been watching it closely right from the time it was a dream for you, 6-7 years ago, I think. He started off with a little bit about how sentimental he got, and I'm getting a little sentimental here because one of the biggest influences and a close friend of mine just spoke, Hormaz Swarajji. Hormaz, where are you in the room? It's 39 years ago last week that you and I did our first rally together. It just struck me. Of course, Hormaz went on to become a very successful rally driver. I soon realized I didn't have a stomach for speed, but I did have a stomach for driving vast distances. And at the age of 20, soon after Hormaz and I finished doing our first rally, the Masa rally in Bombay, out of Bombay in 1985, I went and I did a drive down. Actually, I was chasing Hormaz, who was driving the Himalayan rally then. And thanks to the fact that this was in an era before cell phones, I didn't know that he was out of the rally. He'd rolled over in Mussoorie and I'd gone all the way up to Manali waiting for Hormaz to come, which he never did. Anyway, that passion went on from there, and I think it started off in the early 90s when I used to travel abroad and I started driving wherever I visited. So it was USA, much of Europe I've done in separate drives over the years. And then I got lucky that Hormaz got involved in setting up 2 large international drives, which I was part of. They were convoy drives, but one was, I think the first one was in 2007 when we drove from Bangladesh through the SAARC countries and into Pakistan and back to Bombay. 2012, then I did the ASEAN rally with Hormaz, once again as part of the autocar team, putting it together. And my job was essentially cleaning the cars every night and stickering the cars at every border crossing. But that was a fun event, but it set me up for what I thought I could do. I'd already done a lot of driving before that, and across, as I said, across much of Europe, and I can't even remember how Tejas, I sent him the list yesterday. But the first solo drive I did was in 2013 when with my family I drove up to Spiti. So Bombay to Spiti with 2 relatively young kids and my wife. And that set it up, and I think one of the most fortuitous things that happened to me was the group I came to get close to over the years. It was actually my passion in running that made me close to most of the other guys I ended up driving with. And one of my friends who's sitting here, who I've driven much of the world with, he's not a runner, but he's a great guy. And so I was trying to put together a list of things that I could share with you all. It's based on completely on my own experience of driving. So there might be many of you who've done a lot of driving as well and have different views on it. But I want to leave you with, I've got what, 7 or 8 points here. So I'm going to take you through them quickly because they just suggested I do that. So number 1 on my list of important factors that I'd like to leave you all with to think about is easily the most crucial part of what Tejas calls overlanding, which I don't do. I don't overland. I drive long distances and cover many countries, often at times, is the choice of the group you go with. I can't stress enough on how important this is to a successful drive. It's more about, of course, you've got to be fit, reasonably fit to be able to do these sort of drives. London to Bombay was 22,500 kilometers over 45 days, so we were driving virtually every day. So the important thing is you've got to find people who are reasonably fit, but more importantly, matured, have a good sense of humor, and are cool in a crisis. Most of the longer trips I've done, and I think the shortest drive I've done would be about 7 or 8 days, and of course this one was 45 days. We've had moments when there have been problems. It could be, I've got caught in landslides in Ladakh, I've got caught in landslides in Himachal, so often spent nights on the road. London to Bombay, in Siberia we had a blowout on the radiator, which we had to figure out and fix. So, and then the political issues a couple of times. 2 months ago I was in Tajikistan driving the Pamir highway and we heard about Israel attacking Iraq and the possibility of airspace being closed. And we had a bit of an internal discussion between the 5 of us on the drive to figure out what to do next. So it's very important to find people who are cool in a crisis and not just great fun to be with while the drive is everything's going good. Other factors like, interest on topics of conversation, on food, easy to get along with, I've just put things like photography, important part. If you can get some guy who manages that aspect of your driving or your trip, it does add a lot of value to it. But most importantly, it's like-minded guys. And I use the word mature in a very broad way because there'll be flare points when 6 or 7 or rather 4 guys are sitting in a car for 8 or 10 hours a day after day. There's going to be small flash points that would irritate one or the other. And we do have that going on, but I'm happy to say that in more than 15 or 18 years of doing road trips with friends, it's never reached a situation when you stop talking to one another, or worse still, somebody wants to leave the drive and exit or go away. Point number 2, of course, would be choice of car. We've always driven SUVs wherever we are. I've taken my own car, I shipped it to London and then drove it back to India. That was, of course, probably the only time I took my own car out of the country, but all the India drives I've done in my own car. It's always based on terrain, the number of participants, so you need a big car which is relatively comfortable, okay to do the sort of terrain you want to be doing, and most importantly, get service in those parts of the world. So, taking a car like, okay, I drove a Mitsubishi Pajero, which was a challenge when that radiator blew in Siberia. We couldn't fix it, we didn't have a radiator, we had to find the next city that did have it. It was 600 kilometers away, we had to flatbed the car. So a lot of things, a lot of moving parts that fell into place and had to be worked through to get the car back on the road. So that's another factor. So, talking to people across the world, I'm told that the best options are, of course, as Holma said, the Toyota. It's bulletproof, we've driven Toyotas all over. I now own a Land Cruiser, but I've done Namibia, I've done much of Africa now by road, and it's always Toyota everywhere. So generally that car gets the best service support anywhere in the world. Left-hand drive petrols apparently seem to be the best overall option to do international car drives. Sadly, you can't rent cars which take you across borders typically because of the restrictions on moving rental cars across international borders. So if it's an international drive across several countries, you probably have to take your own car or buy a car, figure out how to sell it at the destination or ship it back and sell it. It gets pretty complicated. The one big thing is, I know this is a group of people who heavily modify their cars, and someone said show and go. I'm very much against that personally, at least for long distance drive vehicles. My cars are super stock, so I don't modify anything, and I'm one of those who believes that the manufacturer has figured it all out when he spec'd it the way he spec'd it, whether it be size of tires, suspension, an engine and everything else. And obviously they are the most reliable when they are as close to stock as possible. The only sort of modifications I would do, and I have done, are maybe driving lights, auxiliary lights, or a roof rack, and stuff like that. But otherwise, nothing else that would affect the mechanicals of the car, because that straight away compromises, in my opinion, reliability. Car preparation is the next one I have here on the list. So safety first always. So brakes, lights, wipers, tires. That's the first thing I look at when preparing a car or selecting a car for a long drive, especially if it's not a very new car. Then you come into the reliability points, which I generally look at, just generally the engine, cooling, suspension, transmission, that sort of stuff. Comfort, also an important aspect. So I've done stuff to make the seats more comfortable, upgrade a sound system for a long drive, that sort of thing. You check your air conditioning, heating, those sort of elements. And then there's the paperwork that goes with the car. So Mr. Dosa, his company, WIA, helped us with the Carne in 2017 when we drove across 15 countries. The Carne was only needed in 3 of those 15 countries, but that's a different thing. But we carried all the documents. It can get a little complicated. It needs a lot of preparation. Put in time and your trip goes up a lot better if you spend time figuring this out. Route planning. So based on my experience of doing these longer drives over 7, 10, 15, 20 days, and I've done a few of those durations, more than 2 or 3 days at a time of driving gets very, very tedious and monotonous unless you have no options to stop and spend time at. So I would not advocate, day-to-day driving every single day of the. We're not here to set. There are guys here who are setting land speed records or distance records. Someone was just telling me about a trip he did from, I think, Ladakh to Kanyakumari, 95 hours in an electric vehicle. So I'm not from that sort of driving culture. I like to see the places we stop at. We see a nice restaurant, or we see a nice town, or a nice vista, or a castle up on a hill, we'll take that diversion and go up. So yeah, it reminds me of the time I drove Iceland 4 or 5 years ago. Those familiar with that country, there's the ring road, I think they call it the A1 or the ring road. It's about 1,200 kilometers, Reykjavik to Reykjavik. So I rented the car and I came back with 2,700 kilometers on it. And the car rental guy was shocked. He said, "What have you done and where have you driven?" I was more than twice as much the distance of the whole road. And then I was taking every opportunity to go off. You see a glacier, you drive up to the glacier, or a snowfield, or this town, that, or a village or whatever. So that's the sort of value we put into our, to enrich the drive. It's not just about driving across the countries. Okay, so then there's paperwork that I talked about. You've got the challenges of borders. I've crossed many international borders on more than one drive. And it's always exciting, it's always a challenge, there's always something that comes out of somewhere. Point in case was when we crossed from Latvia into Russia. And people might be familiar that when you leave the UK now, you don't get your passport stamped out. Okay, so I put it onto a car at Dover and we drove across, we came across on the channel to Calais, and we were straight off the train, and then we drove the rest of Europe, France, Holland, Germany, and then Poland and Latvia, Lithuania, Latvia, and there was no stamp on our passport to even confirm that we had entered the EU zone. So we had a rough time there where they stopped me for more than 3 hours, and they said that you're an illegal immigrant and all sorts of allegations, and we had to figure this out bit by bit. We waited for the shift to change, somebody else came on, and we appealed, and then we showed them that we'd arrived in London 3 days or whatever, 7 days earlier, and that we'd only driven across the continent into Russia. Okay, then there's packing. So based on experience, I mean, this is the sort of stuff I usually drive in because they're light, easy to wash. I don't ever wear jeans when I drive. I'm just giving you a few specifics which I can leave you all with, because they don't dry, because if they get wet, they're heavy to carry. There's a bunch of reasons why you do not use those sort of, those sort of clothes. It comes with time. Medication, paramount. You carry everything that you regularly need and carry everything that you anticipate needing in an emergency. Tools and spares. Now that's something that many of you probably are experts at. But when we did London, Bombay, we carried all the basic stuff. I mean, I didn't carry a clutch plate or a differential, but I did carry belts and hoses and fuses and that sort of stuff, which could take me through much of the anticipated regular issues that might have come up on the drive. So that needs a bit of planning. You can talk to the OEMs, you can talk to other guys who've done a lot of that sort of stuff and carry that. Obviously the car's adequately checked prior to the trip starting, so that most of the stuff won't be ever needed. Supplies for an emergency. So I always go with the motto to ourselves, and Fahim here knows that you hope for the best and plan for the worst. So we always carry adequate food and water if we have to sit it out 2 or 3 days. We've done some pretty extreme stuff. We drove to Lake Baikal in winter. Okay, that was 25, 30 below zero, a couple of years, just 3 or 4 days before the world locked down in 2020. But on a trip like that, although it was a relatively local trip, we would carry enough stuff, enough warm clothes. If the car gets stranded, or both the cars, if you're a multiple car trip, if the cars get stranded, you cannot move, you don't die of either exposure or hunger or lack of water. So we're always carrying that, even for a short trip. I mean, some of you might have been up to Spiti, but even doing a trip from Gaza up to, let's say, Lanza or Comic, for people who are familiar with that area, it's just a 20-30 kilometer. I've done it in extreme winter in a snowstorm, and we carried everything, even expecting to be back down in 3 or 4 hours. And sure enough, we did get stranded up there, and we couldn't see, we were in a whiteout, and we had a rough time there for a couple of hours till we could figure our way down the mountain again. Then there's, of course, the first aid kits. Can't stress enough on the importance of carrying a pretty comprehensive first aid kit, and importantly, knowing how to use it. So Tejas had actually taken us through, and he'd given us a full briefing which lasted a couple of hours on how to handle an emergency on the road, right from resuscitation to, I think, snake bites, breaking bones, and all that sort of stuff. So that's something worth investing in terms of time, and if there's money involved, it makes sense. Cash cards, figure that out depending on the country you're visiting, and the remoteness of where you're going. So there may be parts of the world where credit cards do work, but on experience, I can say that generally it's better to carry cash. On a London-Bombay kind of drive, we carried a lot of US dollars because that was what was then most commonly accepted. Doing London-Bombay through Russia today, your US dollars wouldn't be worth too much. Communication, another important aspect that we always spend time on and look into. You got to make sure that the phones you're carrying, the SIM cards you're carrying, do actually work in the areas that you're traveling through. There have been areas of the world that I've done, Namibia is one of them, where we carried satellite phones because we were completely off the grid. So we were communicating or keeping in touch with family back in India via sat phone. Car-to-car radio we've used. We've used, of course, on our convoy drives, it's all set up. But even walkie-talkies and all, they add a lot of value to communicating between groups, between multiple car trips. The other small tips I can leave you with. So London, Bombay, in 45 days we stayed in 37 different hotels. So we were virtually changing rooms every day. Had to watch out on what you were carrying. There's always the possibility of leaving something behind. You're just in and out, in and out, in and out, repeatedly day after day after day. So that rhythm sets in over time about how to manage your stuff. I mean, many people here are probably very experienced travelers and know how to figure that out. But that was always something that I gave a lot of focus to, because I remember on the very first night that we spent outside of Moscow in a city called Nizhny Novgorod, I left my laptop bag and a couple of other things behind a curtain in the room. And it's only when I came out and we started driving, and I remember I went back and I changed the way I was managing my personal stuff in the rooms from then on, and nothing got lost thereafter. So I can't stress enough on managing that aspect of it, because that can really throw your trip out. I once left I used to carry what they call a fanny pouch, a belt, with my passport, cash, papers, car papers, license, this and that. And in a city called Kazan, we once went into a shop to buy a t-shirt. It was a Porsche showroom actually, and I left the thing there and we drove off. And about a kilometer down the road, I realized that I had left it behind. And that was the most heart-stopping moment. I thought my trip was over there. The whole London-Bombay drive would have ended over there if I lost the car papers, my cash, and my passport with it. Anyway, I ran back, and thanks to the fact that the people there were very honest, they hadn't moved the bag. Fitness and exercise, I mean, that's more of a personal thing, coming from a culture of having been active all my life. I did focus on that because spending 7 or 8 hours in a car every day can get pretty hard on the body. Not everyone's used to it. It'll take a few days to get into the rhythm of driving those sort of distances. So I used to do yoga, a bit of yoga, maybe 10 minutes of it every morning, get up a little earlier than the rest of the crew, and do it to ensure that I could get through such a long drive. So I would advocate that if you all are planning that, work on your fitness a little bit prior to the trip, especially if it's a long trip, 2, 3, 4 weeks, months, 2 months, whatever. And then do something during the drive to stay active, because driving per se is not a very active sport. Personally, I cut down on how much I eat when I drive, when I do long drives. I don't get too ambitious or adventurous with the local food. In Cambodia on the ASEAN rally, I did eat a fried scorpion. I remember that, but I don't think I'd repeat such an indiscretion again and take chances with that sort of stuff. So that's pretty much it. I'd leave it with, I'd urge you all to, to explore those dreams if you have it. Nothing's very impossible. It's all quite doable now. Great cars available. The world's opened up. It's easy to get from everywhere to everywhere, by and large. And do it while you're relatively young and fit. But I mean, people have often asked me that what was the hardest thing that you ever had to manage on a road trip? And of course, as I said, the hardest thing was getting a group together and finding the right guys to go with. Everything else falls into place if you have the right team around you or team with you. But the more you plan, the better your trip's going to be. So just live your dreams and keep going at it.